Hi, this is a bit different than most videos I do. You know, like usually I tend to do much more classy video essays about donuts and stuff. But as a very active author in the Omori community, I just couldn't really let these kinds of plot holes cloud the conversation surrounding the game constantly. I decided that I had to release some kind of definitive video on the subject so that people might just stop talking about them entirely. There's a high possibility they'll just ignore me. Oh well. Whatever. This is also just for my own peace of mind. So, what are the most commonly cited plot holes in Omori, and how can I call them stupid? Let's find out. The first big one I'll be talking about is that no authorities would ever believe that Mari, the main character's elder sister, whose death is the core plot beat of the game, was killed by suicide. After all, there would be bruises on her body from falling down the stairs, right? Clearly, the authorities would know. Well, that would be a big sticking point if it weren't for a couple of other factors. First of all, the authorities could simply write those off as self-harm injuries. After all, her neck was still snapped from the hanging cover-up that the main character and his best friend did to cover their tracks. According to a friend of mine, it's also not uncommon for bruises to appear post-mortem during a hanging anyway. Even so, her dress covered her entire body rather conveniently. Not only that, police don't often like to investigate too much into incidents like this. There's no reason to make the family even more distressed than they already are, after all. Even throwing all this out the window, this isn't even a plot hole. It just suggests that the police department of faraway town is sloppy. Many people also think there's no way that the parents wouldn't know in the game. However, I mean, if my daughter committed suicide in my backyard, I probably wouldn't look too much into the state of her body. I'd be more concerned about why she did such a thing. I would not be concerned with figuring out whether or not it was actually a suicide, because I'd have no reason to believe it wasn't. Speaking of the situation surrounding Mari's suicide being staged, there are a lot of people who seem to get caught up on this. For example, they seem to think it's a plot hole that Sunny and Basil even staged the suicide in the first place. After all, why would you take your sister's corpse and hang it? Isn't that a little absurd? Well, I don't think it is. The game heavily implies at several points that Basil's a suicidal person himself, and due to his knowledge of plants, he knows how to tie a noose to hang up pots if he needs to. Since the two of them were in a panicked state, I could easily imagine that they might come to this conclusion, especially considering one of them has a history of suicide himself, that being Basil, and the other has a history of being a doormat and doing what other people tell him to do. They're just kids. They didn't know what to do and were scared of getting in trouble. Even if it was totally ridiculous, which I don't think it is, it wouldn't be a plot hole. It would be an indication of their character or mental state at the time. It's not literally impossible for it to happen. Another point of contention surrounding Mari's death has to do with when it happened. There are a substantial amount of people who seem to think that it happened when she hung from the tree as opposed to when she fell down the stairs. This is just wrong. In the game, they make it pretty clear that she's dead in the text. They say that when she's in the bed that she's no longer breathing, which is before the hanging. Yes, people can stop breathing when they're alive, but there will be no other reason for this text to exist other than to inform the reader that the person in the bed, who they know to be Mari, is dead. I genuinely cannot see any other reason for this text to exist. Seriously, what other narrative function does it serve to the audience? Mari's being dead doesn't stop her from talking to Sunny at several junctures throughout the game as a form of a guilt trip hallucination thingy. There are a lot of people who argue that this is a real ghost Mari, as opposed to Sunny's brain just being a big dum-dum like usual. The big argument in support of this theory is that Hiro could hear the piano music that Mari was playing. However, it is much more likely, and not a plot hole at all, considering how often Hiro talks about hearing Mari's music, that Hiro just heard the music too, because he also hallucinates. If I was in the house of my dead girlfriend, who used to play the piano a lot, to the point that I could hear her music from my house, I'd probably hear her music playing too, regardless of whether or not she was actually there. Hell, I've been in this situation before without any trauma required. When I was 10, I would hear the Water Temple music from Ocarina of Time playing if I stayed up too late for inexplicable reasons. Spooky stuff that Water Temple music is. One big Omori plot hole that many people seem to overlook, despite it being low-hanging fruit, is how was Aubrey able to clean the ink off of the photographs? On first blush, this seems watertight and not like an easy thing to do. After all, there could be years of ink residue on them. Luckily, the game never explicitly states when she stole the photo album from Basil. She could have stolen it the day after Sunny had originally drawn the ink on them and cleaned them off, which would be significantly easier. One day of ink drying is much better than 4 years worth of it. Not only that, you can actually notice little bits of ink residue on the images themselves. Seriously, if you look at some of the photos in the photo album, there are tiny splotches of ink. So even assuming she did it at the earliest possible juncture, there's still evidence that she wasn't completely able to clean the ink off of the photos. Not a plot hole, and instead one of the most overlooked and cool details in the game, something I like quite a bit. There is only one Omori plot hole that I can think of, and it's so stupid that it doesn't matter. That being, how did the photo album that Sunny got from Basil not get wet when Sunny jumped into the water to save him at the lake? Seriously. He had it in his shirt pocket or some kind of fucking hammer space dimension he keeps all his stuff in. How did it not get wet at all? How are the photos okay? I demand answers, Omocat! Obviously it doesn't matter because so-called plot holes are stupid things that internet reviewers like to point out in a failed attempt to seem smart. And the ones in Omori? They're either non-existent, or they're so minuscule that you won't even notice them unless you try hard enough. This has been Arcade and Everlasting, Plot Hole Filler, signing off. Thank you for watching.